So I'm delighted today to welcome Kamakshi Sivaramakrishnan.
Thank you.
And today we're going to talk about her journey in Silicon Valley through a couple of different chapters from joining and founding a number of startups and then also kind of the exits around this. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Pete.
So I'd love to start at the first company you worked at, AdMob, which just a fascinating story. So you joined them around 2007, I believe. And so, I mean, this was a fascinating rocket ship from my vantage point. So I got to know Omar a little bit, the CEO. We were both Sequoia portfolio companies around the same time. And he went to kind of 0 to 100 or
Very quickly.
750
Yes, indeed,
very, very
750.
quickly. So I'd love to share a little bit about how you got that opportunity and kind of how was that experience for you?
For sure. Um, my story with AdMob is kind of an interesting one. I got my PhD. I'll start maybe a step earlier,
Great.
right? I got my PhD in a field called information theory at Stanford. So information theory is actually even pretty unique, even among kind of the engineering community, in the sense that it is basically mathematics for electrical engineers. So it's kind of a World War II time era kind of field that actually emerged in that time
Mhm.
by kind of a legendary scientific figure called Claude Shannon. It was primarily done for kind of information encryption coding during the wartime. And then basically, it's a mathematical framework by which you process information, quantized information, anything that is represented, for example, binary value data. And that has evolved over the course of the years. A lot of the hard problems have been solved over the last sort of 70 years or so. So what remains are the very, very hard problems that are, yet they're all kind of very math in the realm of like, mathematical optimality of said algorithms that processes information optimally with this kind of performance results. That's roughly kind of the framework of information theory. So I got my PhD in a field of by solving some problems on denoising of continuous value data. So any ambient data that you acquire is going to be noisy. How do you kind of denoise the data, extract value from the signal, and you're able to process it for said use case application? So how do you optimally denoise data? Now think about kind of it's called universal denoising techniques of continuous value data.
Mhm.
Nothing of that says anything about AdMob and kind of mobile advertising and marketing.
Mhm.
But I think this is kind of what the legend of kind of AdMob is in my mind. What my PhD prepared me is basically think from the ground up. Don't be afraid of like, blank sheets of paper. You can think kind of from first principles up and develop algorithms, design them, prove optimality, implement them, and bring potentially build product and bring them to market. I didn't do the build product. I didn't have any idea of bringing them to market, etc. I stopped at algorithm design and proving optimality. I literally ran into Omar on campus. He said, "You should come talk to us." And we were like, I don't know, it was less than 20 people at Mob at the time.
Mhm.
It was a dingy little office in San Mateo, like atop a number of sushi restaurants. San Mateo is known for great sushi
Mhm.
in the Bay Area. So I went in one of the days because he asked me to come over. And Mark, here at this time, I had like a number of academic offers and the who's who at the time. Lehman Brothers was still around, Lehman Brothers, Morgan Stanley, quants, because a lot of information theories went into quantitative finance.
And you were just finishing your
My
PhD
PhD at
at
this
that
time.
time. Okay, so you were thinking
So I
about
was thinking
what's
about
next.
what next. I didn't have
Yeah.
anything that was like a marketable idea myself. Even though
Yeah.
you're at Stanford, you cannot miss entrepreneurship. It's everywhere around you. But I come from such a theoretical field that there is nothing marketable or product oriented thinking.
Mhm.
I'm just like a theoretical kind of, algorithm designer. And I say this story with sort of one ulterior purpose, which I'll come to in a second. That there is, I don't know, maybe this resonates with you too, Pete, is that there is no kind of set recipe for the founder journey, right? Each one of us has our own journey.
Yeah.
And this journey of mine sparked with like this accidental meeting with Omar, him asking me to come over to the AdMob office. I go into San Mateo. As I said, it was like this little dingy office atop a bunch of sushi restaurants. I went in the morning. It can be a bit like, smelly because there's a lot of like fish cleaning from the day before. And I was like, "Ugh." It's a very different experience coming from like Stanford and like, nevertheless, there was a lure that was unexplainable to me, even though the red carpet of Goldman Sachs, Lehman, Citi, Morgan Stanley, all the kind of university campuses and tenure track faculty positions completely like glitzy compared to this one. There's a lure, and I agreed to give it a try. It took me some time from that point to actually convert it to actually going and being a part of that team.
And what was Omar, and you must have seen that actually this is, the traditional kind of web desktop-based advertising systems were getting established at that point in terms of just the tracking and matching. And um, what was it in the mobile space and the data problem that was sort of intriguing that he needed someone of your kind of academic and algorithmic background?
So, see, I think at the time when AdMob had just started, it was basically trying to create kind of a mobile ad-supported economy. It was not present at the time. Even if present,
Yeah,
it
this is
was
before the iPhone launch.
yeah, this is before iPhone.
Yeah.
And it was basically kind of, I would say, a little bit of like ghetto world out there. There were a few ways to kind of, market products, ringtones, and wallpapers.
Yeah.
This is what it was at the time in terms of mobile marketing. Mobile advertising was still extremely at its infancy. So AdMob's story was not simply kind of trying to create a comparable marketplace to at that time the real marketplace was AdSense, AdWords. It was very Google dominated, to your point, kind of very desktop forward to kind of replicate that economy in this fast emerging mobile kind of world. And I think the timing between AdMob's kind of founding and the launch of the iOS, kind of the iPhones, and more broadly speaking, iOS class of devices soon after, basically created an ecosystem that kind of, while standardizing kind of the operating system and being able to create kind of marketplaces, it also fast tracked what does it mean to advertise, market, and mobile.
Yeah.
And AdMob was at the perfect moment in time. I just saw this article of this morning about kind of NVIDIA being in kind of, it's a story of contradictions. It's wild luck and great strategy.
Yeah.
I felt like a version of that was true for kind of AdMob as well. It's wild luck because perfect timing with kind of Apple's iPhone launch, and great strategy in the sense of like, it reminds me of my first boss, Kevin Scott at AdMob, telling me like the sexiest startups or the sexiest ideas are the ones that you get started, nobody even knows about it. You're prepared so that when kind of the tide strikes, you're prepared. I felt like AdMob had that. So when Apple struck, we launched and took off.
I mean, it's just like investing and stuff. You have to back companies that are non-consensus before they become consensus.
Exactly.
But it's like today, mobile advertising is obviously, and just 3 years later was very consensus.
Exactly. But coming to your question about what was kind of the data problem is that now you have to predict. See, unlike search had an explicit intent where you're going into the toolbar and saying, I, as a consumer, I'm looking for this. So the keyword matching to kind of ad supported had an explicit signal of intent. Whereas when you think about contextual advertising, where it's not search-based, where that intent signal isn't there explicitly, that means you're basically in the web world, it's very content-rich. So you're able to kind of understand the context of the page and do some contextual matching. And then there was this whole kind of evolution to understanding the behavioral intent of a user based on some of their activity in the web, et cetera, and to your point of tracking, et cetera. And that was kind of the web evolution. But in mobile, the problem is very hard because that many signals are simply unavailable. It was a very sparse kind of signal environment. So as a result of which, algorithm design of being able to understand monetizability of advertising in the presence of sparse data is a algorithm design problem. So that's kind of where the intersection between some of what my background in information theory could be valuable to kind of thinking the problem from scratch and not simply saying that we're going to take Google's logistic regression that was done for search and contextual advertising and kind of replicate it in mobile, because that is not going to work as well because the signal profile is quite different.
And so Google acquired AdMob just like a couple of years after
Actually,
launching?
yeah, it was a couple years. 2009 was when the acquisition, actually 2010 was when the acquisition was announced.
Okay.
And then we were stuck in kind of FTC approval, DOJ approval for almost 7-8 months.
Yeah.
I mean, this speaks to the fortitude of a founder. You know, I have such great appreciation for this, Pete, now, and maybe you, of course, will have your perspectives as well. 8 months of being kind of arguably in kind of, you know, this no man's land, if you may. It's a very public kind of, you know, uh, event of kind of this DOJ approval and cycle. The company needs to operate as though it were an independent company, but this kind of overhang exists. So I have this deep appreciation for.
I went through exactly the same thing. It was
Yes.
9 months between the Trulia and Zillow deal was announced and it closed, and tons of depositions with the FTC and kind of all that stuff. And so, as a public company, so I kind of, I deeply appreciate that you're in this sort of like period of uncertainty. You just need to kind of keep your heads down.
I don't know. I don't mean to kind of turn the tables on you, but it's kind of like, you know, a dichotomy in your mind, right? You have to kind of almost have two parts to your brain and kind of really function as towards the deal, but also kind of operate as though the deal were not to happen. I don't know. I'd love to hear any lesson that you feel like you learned at that time.
Oh, I think it's really challenging. I think you kind of, as you say, you have to kind of compartmentalize your kind of mind to say, look, there's a I don't know that, and this was interesting actually with the Trulia Zilla deal. At the time we announced the deal, the lawyers said, "Oh, 90% approval rating," and then as things progressed, it sort of like, well, kind of like 70-30, then 60-40, and then it went up again to kind of like 95%. But
The emotional roller coaster.
emotional roller coaster. Like there were like a lot of things that kind of, and lots of people, and it's, it's part legal, part economic, and part political. And so, but yeah, it's hard. And I kind of think that's the founder journey, right? You've got this like 17 things going on at the time. There's kind of
Absolutely.
fires over here, there's fires over here. And you just need to like, okay, block some of that stuff out and just focus in on kind of what you need to do. And there are things you control and there's things that you don't control. And
Absolutely.
when you're operating a business, you don't control what the FTC does, but you kind of do control kind of your business, your metrics, your customers, your product, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I'm sure that was. And how many with AdMob, how many people were there at the point of the acquisition?
Probably about 250 people.
Okay, so you went from 20 to 250 in a couple of
250
years.
people by the time we were acquired. This was back in 2010 when the deal closed.
AdMob, kind of, I think it's mobsters is the kind of like the collective noun for kind of people that work there.
Yes.
What's the and a bunch of mobsters went on to do a bunch of different things. You mentioned the CTO of Microsoft, Kevin. Like what was it in the DNA, do you think, that kind of created a sort of diaspora of people that went off and do interesting entrepreneurial things?
I think it's a great question. When I think back among all the companies that either I've founded or I've been a part of, I think AdMob certainly stands out as one of that kind of unique kind of moments in time. The reason I call that not a company but a moment in time is because it brought together these people who had probably dysfunctional in some ways, or rather misfits, not
Yeah, yeah,
dysfunctional, misfits in some ways, but yet extremely creative, deeply technical, very good at what they do, and very driven and passionate. And maybe it reminds me of one of the points you raised earlier is kind of AdMob had such a blitzing, like start to finish story as well, that when all these people who were brought together with such great characteristics then went on to do greater things because there was that remnant energy in them as well, if I may. And I think I would say that it was a lot about the people. I think while the cultural element from Omar was strong, I think there was a very self-directedness among all the people that were in there as well.
Yeah.
Literally each one of them, the ex-CTO of Instacart, Mark Schaff, CTO of Microsoft, Kevin Scott. Um, there's so many founders who have had their own kind of successful companies as well, including myself. All of them, all of us would even kind of just, there was this constant environment of like iterating and iterating fast. This was back in 2007, 8, 9, right? This move fast, break things wasn't there at the time, but we kind of had this kind of get shit done kind of mentality.
But I think in those high growth startups, people, you see this rapid growth. You have to have high agency in terms of just like, okay, and the fastest growing startups often, have a clear vision, very high bar for hiring, but also high autonomy for people that say, "Look, this is the problem we're trying to solve. I don't know how to do it as a CEO, but like, you need to figure it out, and we're going to do it in 2 weeks."
I think this is such an amazing thing. And that reminds me of kind of my story of Kevin Scott, right? Who led all of engineering at AdMob. He, exactly to your point, hire smart people and get out of their way. I think he embodied that in sort of some very strong ways. And I think to the kind of people like myself, self-directed, a lot of agency, it allowed for a lot of creativity to foster. And I think disagreement and kind of different perspectives and different points of view weren't discouraged in any way, shape, or form. And that I felt was, and in some ways, to be also honest, right? Like longer the company is independent, a lot of kind of evolution happens. Things go wrong, dynamics change and evolve. AdMob was also fortunate that it was almost perfect. It was a little over 4 years, less than 5 years. And so some of the kind of evolution and kind of atrophy, deterioration that is just happens, we could avoid that as well.
Yeah,
right?
people weren't trying to kind of be territorial or like some VP trying to encroach another because everything was growing so fast. You're like,
Everything, there's enough opportunity,
there's
right?
so much opportunity, no fiefdoms,
Yeah. So
and any of that.
as a result of that, I think that environment and incredibly smart people was kind of AdMob's USP. And I would say that kind of the legend of the company is the people it brought together and the journey that they have since crafted on. And AdMob is kind of the early part of that journey for them. So I think that's kind of Omar's, in my opinion, kind of true legacy even beyond the company AdMob, because that was a moment in time. This kind of continues to linger in the journey that all of us have continued to have.
What was the feeling inside the company at the, when you heard about the announcement? Was it, because I imagine these things are like, bingo, job done, or like, really? We're having so much fun. We're kind of like changing the world. We're just getting started. What was the psychology internally?
I think exactly to your point, it was somewhat mixed with the sense of like, I wish we had more, like we can do more. This we could have kind of stayed independent and done more. But at the same time, 750 million in 2009 is, I mean, the forward multiple of that is a big number. At that time, I think it was the third largest acquisition Google had made at the time. DoubleClick, YouTube, and AdMob. So,
And it was 2009 where you're like, this is in the depths of the financial
exactly.
recession, which
Exactly.
was like there's no activity and
Exactly.
valuations were really down.
Exactly. So I think there was that, because it also had exactly to that previous point of it brought together these people, all of us with like so much agency and so much self-directedness. There was kind of a desire to still own your own destiny, and we have so much more to kind of achieve and we can go do. But there was also a recognition of the fact that, exactly to your point, given kind of the macro environment at the time, and just the sheer fact that this is a significant outcome for the company, there was an acceptance of that as well. So that's why I say kind of mixed, if you may. I'm reminded of Omar actually when he kind of, announced it to the team. His wife was standing at the back of the kind of the team meeting, and Omar's story is a very interesting one. He's had like a couple failures, and then this was kind of AdMob was the big success, and he dedicated it to his wife. So I remember that. Like, I don't know, it's been 16 years since. I still kind of remember that. So that's where kind of the founder story, exactly to your earlier point, is kind of this kind of the human element of like how we all go through kind of the infinite elasticity that we require. So to go through failures and then achieve a success and do this.
I remember a similar thing when we announced the Trulia Zillow merger. There were a bunch of people like, I get so much more many tools and data to play with, or more customers. There were like a group of people like, okay, the scope of my opportunity just doubled or tripled as a function of it. And there were a bunch of people that felt also that the scope of their opportunity diminished as a function of that. And I'd imagine the same thing. It's like if you're kind of an engineer, or your job thrives off data, Google has just got more capacity, more
100%.
compute, more data than anyone else at that time. And so that was a
That was
real
exciting too.
opportunity.
Absolutely. And I would say that on the whole, I think it was one of the kind of best decisions I think maybe Omar made for the company at the time. It was a great decision for a lot of kind of folks in the team. Um, had AdMob been independent, would it have had an outcome as a public company? Maybe. But I don't know. We've also seen through times where private acquisitions have far outperformed the success of public companies as well. So I think overall it's a great moment of success.
So you joined Google for a little bit
Yeah,
after the acquisition, and
I
then
joined Google. I was there for about a hot 7 months. It was a bunch of us. I think it was Omar who left first, then me, and then maybe a few weeks later, Kevin Scott, who then went on to be at LinkedIn and the CTO of Microsoft, and like systematically a lot of folks thereafter. It goes back to that point of this: when you bring such self-driven, high agency, kind of founder-minded people together, I and there is kind of this very early exit, that remnant energy has to be expended, and that's kind of where the founder journey continues into other companies that respond. And for mine is an example of that, right? AdMob's story had just begun. The mobile revolution, we were at the very early sort of part of it. 2007 is when iOS and iPhone were first released, the generation. The app economy was just kind of burgeoning as we speak. Mobile monetization, mobile advertising, mobile marketing had merely but begun. So many kind of different challenges. When we think about kind of time and kind of the rise of Facebook at the time, mobile was transformative for the rise of Facebook, and that happened starting 2011. So you can imagine 2009, this was still early.
Yeah.
So for me, I felt like from a data algorithmic perspective, while Google was incredible in terms of the amount of data available, how transformative AdMob could be inside of Google, there's also kind of the mechanics of acquisition. You have to integrate it. There are kind of, between product, technology, business, a number of things that AdMob had to navigate. And some of us were operating with an infinite sense of urgency. So we wanted kind of momentum and speed. We were used to that at AdMob. So that's why I left to start this company, Drawbridge, because it was so evident at the time that, with the rise of mobile, we are talking not about kind of the single device of consumption. As consumers, we are touching these multiple devices. iPads had broken into the scene. But it's the same consumer who's across these different devices. And when you think about kind of these large consumer environments like Google or Facebook at the time, Amazon less so, they have the notion of identity established because you're authenticating yourself into Gmail, into Google Maps, or whatever be it, and certainly Facebook.
It's a locked-in app experience.
So locked-in app experience. That's not generally true.
Particularly in the advertising markets.
Particularly in the advertising market. So the value of mobile was still, I would say, it was undervalued. Mobile was still undervalued. It was premium in terms of it's a new environment to engage from a kind of brand advertising monetizability potential, but the impact it driven it drives was not fully measured, and that was behind understanding what does that same consumer, how do they interact across these different devices, what is their action, whether it is online, whether it is in the physical world, in the digital world, across these different platforms and devices. And this was the direction that AdMob was kind of moving into. And that's kind of the direction with which I took off and said that that story needed to be completed, but we needed to solve this identity problem. And it's
And that makes sense as an independent company as well, because Google obviously wants to understand users across different devices,
within the Google ecosystem.
just within the Google ecosystem, whereas all the other advertisers and all the other publishers kind of want to understand that
Correct.
kind of that engagement.
So when you think about kind of the walled versus the open
Yeah.
web, if you may, right? Like Google and Meta can solve it inside of kind of their ecosystems, and they do maintain a significant dominance because of that. But when you think about kind of the open web, you're essentially out of luck whether you're on the kind of the brand marketing advertising side, or whether you're on the content app developer, or on the media side. You're out of luck because you've not had this kind of logged in, authenticated experience that
Yeah.
consumers have adopted at scale, and that's where engagement happens. So identity was a problem to solve for. So I left, and
You
I
probably felt that you were uniquely positioned to solve this problem.
because of, again, kind of my background in data, and the kind of the solving for identity is essentially basically with, again, going back to kind of this problem of you're solving for algorithm design in the presence of sparse data. So you have to basically kind of do pattern recognition, which is essentially machine learning, and you're basically doing machine learning on graphs, because you're talking about connectivity. You have devices connected to consumers, consumers connected to each other, those consumers, connected consumers having their own device activity, devices connected with each other. Now, setting aside some of the kind of considerations around privacy, etc. If you think about it, kind of just mathematically speaking, it's a very interesting problem, right? You're talking about kind of a highly connected, dense graph and inferring connectivity of kind of consumers, devices, etc. And this is a machine learning problem at scale, and solving for that in the presence of extremely sparse data. So to your point, I was kind of uniquely positioned to solve for it. And I'm sure you might have had this experience at Trulia as well. Like, after success, you're going to spawn off these kind of entrepreneurially minded folks. And the successful outcome also gives kind of this little pixie dust. So I was able to raise capital pretty quickly when I decided that I wanted to leave Google and kind of go solve this for the open web, if you may. And that's where I raised money, a seed capital from Sequoia and Kleiner Perkins, started this company, Drawbridge. Hard problem to solve. It's really not easy. The data acquisition, it in some ways is basically, it reminds me of like the challenges OpenAI would have gone through. It's a different world today, obviously, than kind of what, but it's data acquisition, whether it's machine learning or AI. A lot of it is about the data acquisition to be able to train models.
And you would integrate into the ad serving technology. Was that the
Yes,
model?
yes. So we had integrated into the ad serving technology, and I don't know, it's an interesting world on its own. So when you think about the financial markets and you think about kind of there's no more like traders standing on kind of physical floors and of the stock exchange and shouting out prices, right? We're talking about high frequency trading. We're talking about entirely automated, programmatic, kind of highly sophisticated trading platforms. That's basically, there's an equivalency of that in kind of the advertising world. It is highly programmatic, it's fully automated. There are these large kind of exchange environments where there's large volumes of kind of inventory. The financial markets, it must be commodities and equities and bonds. And here it is basically the attention span of a consumer in the form of an ad request that is traded. And that has signal, sparse signal, but it has signal. So that we basically tapped into a lot of these kind of, exchanges to be able to understand what that kind of connectivity graph, what can we build out of that connectivity graph. And over time we got better, and we achieved some pretty remarkable results of being able to infer connectivity of devices.
Yeah, and the economics are very attractive, I imagine, in the sense that if you're a publisher and you're making 100 million in ad revenue, and you can apply technology that uplifts that by 10, 20%, it's like
hugely transformative, and it's
it's
much
huge
more
margin.
because especially when you think about kind of that previous problem of AdMob and kind of the undervaluing of mobile, right? Because mobile's outcome was completely kind of in a null space. Like what was the effect of kind of exposure of a brand or an ad message in mobile? I don't know what action did they took. The promise of all of digital was actions are measurable, right? So that's why it became so the fundamental value of Google over the course of, and Meta now, and even Amazon, these are kind of the three horsemen in advertising, if you may, is around the fact that digital is measurable. That's how they've kind of built these massive enterprises. So mobile was not measurable, and that problem was tied to identity. And so you were able to your point, really increase value of mobile as well. So that's kind of the problem that we saw. At the heart of it, what was very exciting and interesting for me is building these very sparse. You start from very sparse graphs, and then over time you have to build them up to build the connectivity and increase confidence of associativity and edges.
And imagine there's a real network effect there in the sense the more
Absolutely.
publishers you work with, the more ad networks you work with, the more data you can acquire, and the more you can train your algorithms on the efficacy of that.
Exactly. It's like kind of AI before kind of AI, if you may, that this is like a decade and a half before. What was AI before? It was basically machine learning is what the early incarnation of AI has been, because it was more predictive rather than generative. So that's basically, this was machine learning done at scale on large graphs. And that was kind of the journey and the value proposition of Drawbridge to take kind of the initial kind of seed companies like AdMob had raised this, kind of creating this potential of mobile, and then kind of that evolving into saying it's kind of about the consumer, no matter where their engagement and their touch points are. If you have to deliver to that story, you have to understand identity better. That's why Meta and Google were really good at it. And this was about being able to create that opportunity for the open web for an average brand, even for a premium brand. The more premium the brand, the less data that they had in understanding their consumer in digital, if you may. So this was kind of really interesting times where we kind of captured this.
So you started in
2011.
11, and you raised in total how much?
So I started with a 6.5 million seed, and then we went on to raise over 60 million in the company over about 7 years in the company, across 3 rounds of financing, including some debt financing as well. And the company had an interesting journey and evolution, because this was the time when also serendipitously the Cambridge Analytica and kind of, how consumer consent, there was kind of this rising awareness of what does it mean for consumers to be participating in consent around data, that kind of footprint that they leave across the internet, if you may. So we went through some really interesting considerations of when
So there was a period of time where it's probably the Wild West in terms of data was available. People were obviously an idea of privacy, but didn't really appreciate perhaps how valuable a bunch of this data would be.
I mean, today, that's even true today, right? But to far lesser extent. There's an appreciation, but are they significantly participating in that value that is being created by their participation in the internet against kind of all these free services that we all talk about how much we are the product, right? But exactly to your point, it is kind of the wild, wild west at the time. So there was regulation that was coming in, as you can imagine. You must have been a part of it as well. GDPR was one of the most significant ones that came in at the time. And it kind of helped us understand, how do we even evolve this? Like, how do we participate in these kind of large programmatic, highly automated trading environments where signals are being inferred to be able to build these graphs? It helped us evolve how we would do that based off of consent. And then it was kind of, as we were servicing, we had really large customers, Disney, ESPN, think about large customers, so even kind of platforms such as LinkedIn, et cetera. It was a kind of a customer relationship that we had.
LinkedIn was a customer.
Was an early customer relationship. And it just so happened that I received a call from one of the product leads at LinkedIn saying that, hey, we have a problem, because LinkedIn was growing in its mobile presence. And I don't know if this is the best kept secret or not, but LinkedIn is a massive B2B kind of marketing platform. It's kind of the clean version of I don't know, Facebook, if you may, from kind of even from a marketing and an advertising
Oh,
perspective.
I think today it's quite well, it's very well known, I'd say, amongst B2B startups, but like 5 years ago, I don't, it was, certainly wasn't like,
Yeah, it
and
was in
it's,
it was the size of it's called LinkedIn Marketing Solutions. The size of it was a surprise to me itself, kind of when I got to know it more. And they have this kind of fundamental problem saying that when the enterprise buying cycle is unlike a consumer buying cycle, it's more consensus and kind of a group-based decision. There are multiple touch points. It's not an individual decision. You're not like clicking and interacting like a one-click purchase on mobile. That's not what enterprise products are about. So again, going back to that earlier point of kind of, inventory being undervalued. LinkedIn had a kind of a fundamental problem to address around how to kind of properly value LinkedIn's mobile engagement, because mobile engagement had outpaced kind of the desktop-based, browser-based engagement, but yet the inventory had to be better valued. So this identity problem is still an important one, and not unlike the authentication and logged in experience is not as pervasive as say Facebook was at the time. So there is kind of this problem to solve as well. How do we better value our inventory? So that product conversation from an early customer engagement, we were able to, as I said, we had really become very good at learning kind of identity or learning these kind of pattern recognition, which is large scale machine learning on graphs. And they were kind of blown away because they have kind of, as you can imagine, like machine learning is what? You're basically learning on some sample data, and there is this holdout where you're going to measure against. And environments like LinkedIn can be very good about validation because they can give you some training data and they can measure how effectively you are because there is authenticated data. And they were kind of blown away by the kind of performance that we had. Obviously, that's why we had this customer engagement. They put us through kind of a lot more kind of testing, aggressive testing, to see if this is really kind of what it can be.
And this was just as a customer deployment. This was
Customer
initially.
deployment, but then at some point it became apparent that, look, I think this is more than a customer deployment. They kind of want to really see if this can be a capability that they have to look into kind of more deeply, right? And that, and this was kind of my version of kind of, uh, an M&A environment. It was not quite an M&A conversation, but there was a.
You could see it might go there, and you were okay with
I
sort
was
of.
okay with the engagement
Yeah.
around it, right? Because it does take away kind of engineering product cycles to be able to engage so deeply with a big provider who's also a customer, and we have other customers that we have to kind of service as well. And that basically post kind of evaluation, aggressive technical evaluation, etc. Then it became a story of, okay, now we are interested in doing kind of a transaction here.
And is there any, so as you look back at that experience, it's sort of, you know, there's part of it is your own psychology, how you think about the kind of future path of the company. Part of it is, navigating a kind of BD to corp dev relationship. And it's sort of, and often advice I give founders, if you see there's a natural partner, don't call up corp dev because you're going to end in one sort of transition, and you don't have one path, and you don't have the internal champion that thinks your product is fantastic, or even not BD, but kind of product itself. Would there be, as you look back at the sort of process you went through, is there any advice you give founders to navigate this sort of corporate customer relationship that may or may not go into a M&A environment?
I think the best relationships are the ones that are formed with product teams, and I barely interact with corp dev kind of functions.
Yeah.
I think if the product team is the key sponsor, the product sponsorship is the most important one, even if you're seeking actively kind of an M&A transaction. So my advice to founders would be develop like strong connections as you have these early customer engagements. It may or may not develop into kind of an M&A transaction that you may or may not want, but having the relationships with kind of product sponsorships, key product leads across kind of your key strategic customers is important, because those relationships, the updates that you have, the kind of strategic opportunities that you could partner with, whether they are in the context of a customer or a more strategic engagement, that action happens largely on kind of the product side, at least in kind of very technically driven product companies. So I think those relationships are important. Sometimes founders can tend to, our lives are kind of, busy. To your point, we do 15, 20 things in any given day. These things can probably take a back seat sometimes, but never compromise on these relationships with your large strategic customers, having that kind of relationship and taking time, having the quarterly, kind of monthly, depending on the customer profile, depending on your relationship, depending on kind of other factors, keep those relationships. I think that's extremely important because depending on the company, product, and time, these evolve into very kind of probably naturally, whether they are acquisitions or one of the biggest customer opportunities your company would ever have. I personally felt like I never had a VP, SVP, or a head of corp dev. I handled it myself.
Avoided them completely.
We couldn't. I felt we were small to have that as a function. I have no statements about the value of that function. It's an extremely critical function. But founders, I think, are best kind of brand marketers of themselves. Founders have gone way more savvy today than earlier on. And similarly, I think corp dev function should be kind of very founder led.
I imagine there was a sort of decision point between like joining LinkedIn and kind of and seeing that, okay, you can add significant value to this perhaps under monetized, high potential advertising business, and then staying independent and working across a range of different customers. What were some of the decision points that you had? Were you concerned about competitive threats or concerned about an independent path? What were some of the catalysts?
LinkedIn itself was a catalyst. I mean, I've, in kind of the 20 plus years of career at this time, I've had a number of the big corporate kind of environment work experience, certainly startups as well, different cultures, different people. I would say LinkedIn is legendary for the kind of culture that it has, the kind of
It was under Jeff Weiner then?
Under Jeff Weiner then.
Terrific guy, yeah.
Terrific.
Great CEO.
It's I've had other kind of acquisitions since. I've had other kind of experiences since. LinkedIn is special in terms of going into the company. I had done a little bit of research, just trying to understand, as every founder would. There was a lot that was talked about kind of the LinkedIn culture, right? And how much culture was at the heart and of kind of the success of LinkedIn itself. To be honest, I had a little bit of skepticism about, is this a little bit of an overproductionized story? Like, is it really this true? And having spent a couple years there, and even now, I have the strongest relationships with folks at LinkedIn. And there's genuineness about that. And I think it's one of my fondest stories of kind of the team that acquired us. The executive sponsor was Ryan Roslansky, who succeeded now the CEO of LinkedIn. I think having my conversation with Ryan, and at that time I had to obviously, talk to Jeff as well. It was all extremely instrumental. And to your point, there were considerations, obviously, to stay independent. And we had a successful kind of path ahead of us. But I think being a part of this and to get some of the platform and wind under our wings that LinkedIn a part of Microsoft, right? Microsoft had receded pretty aggressively from all things advertising at the time, but still nevertheless had a sufficiently large search-based advertising business. And there are lots of intersects and interconnects between Microsoft and LinkedIn as well. So kind of the potential of kind of a larger canvas, LinkedIn itself. And LinkedIn is a very technology product first company. And that was a big cultural fit for me and kind of the Drawbridge team as well. All of that kind of dispelled some of the kind of hesitation that we would have in our minds to kind of continue our independent journey versus this. An interesting backstory is I was literally, this is not even kind of, it happened to be resonating at the same time. I was literally delivering my child at the time of the acquisition. So actually, one of the final decision-making meetings for the acquisition, because LinkedIn is an extremely high ethics company, does absolutely the right thing by kind of every member who's at LinkedIn. And I don't say this because they acquired my company. I say this as an employee who saw LinkedIn in action. So privacy and the implications of kind of, data and data technologies was extremely important, even though there is kind of the under monetizability problem to solve, but do it the right way. So we were very aggressively tested for this, and there were lots and lots of meetings. It was a long
The
process.
diligence
The
process,
diligence
going into
process
everything,
was
security and
extremely
everything. Yeah.
security, privacy, governance, diving into every aspect of everything that we did. It was a long process. And then after all this, after almost 7-8 months of diligence, it had pretty much butted up against 3 days before my due date to deliver my child. And that was the only day that a lot of folks had to come together for the meeting. And it was about 8 hours or so. I was 3 hours away from my due date. And, oh, sorry, 3 days away from my due date. And my family had come to help, and they thought that this was highly imprudent of me to this close to kind of the big day. Nevertheless, and I still remember the entire LinkedIn cast and crew were so thoughtful about kind of my situation. And anyway,
You gave them an ultimatum. You need to decide by this day.
actually, I remember. So the funny anecdote is, I walked in. A couple folks didn't know about kind of my situation. So they were like, oh my God, maybe we should do this another time. And I was like, no, there's no other time. After this is a long, much later.
I'm going to be focused somewhere else. So let's get this done now.
So it was kind of an interesting. So we spent about 9 hours. And then the next day, because this is the last week, you go on daily checkups. My doctor was like, your blood pressure is off the charts. Like, what did you do yesterday? You were fine yesterday morning.
As it happened.
And he said, you need to be admitted today. So then I had to go in, and then they didn't know. They were anyway, long story short, the next day I received a text that I think we're going to do the deal. Again, LinkedIn is very measured. Even if they're absolutely certain, it's very measured. I think we're going to do the deal. Go deliver your child. So delivered my child, completed kind of the post-term sheet process, etc., through the early days of my child being born. And so it's
got it. It's always the way. Everything happens at once.
don't you think so? Like you get to your point,
No
to your
quiet
earlier
moments.
point of there are certain things outside your control. This was one of those things. I just couldn't control the timing of
for
this.
sure. And I'm curious. You had some big name investors. You said Sequoia and Kleiner. Like, how the independent path versus an acquisition. Were they? Did you feel there was full alignment between them, or was it hard to get kind of everyone on board in the same direction?
There was largely full alignment around this one. I would say that at least to your point, I felt like a lot of it is very maybe partner led. Because Legendary has a lot of kind of perspectives. It's a very strong culture at Sequoia as well. But Jim, I think, Jim Getz at Sequoia was on the board of Drawbridge. He led the investment, so he was strongly supportive of it. So I'm pretty sure that kind of played. It was also a big learning experience for me. I had never managed a board before that, and kind of to your point of big name investors, big name board members. Someone called it at the time, you have like a blue chip kind of board for a private company. Yes, how do I kind of do that and navigate through moments? And it both was a learning experience. To your point, supported the outcome, really kind of got behind it, whether from their own respective kind of partnerships. I also had an interesting moment. The Kleiner Perkins partner, Matt Murphy, had moved on from Kleiner Perkins to Menlo, but he continued to kind of be the steward for Kleiner's investment, even though he was at Menlo.
Right.
So I had that interesting dynamic as well.
And it's because that's not uncommon, and sometimes you can see those board members be somewhat passive. Um, uh, I'm sure that's an interesting dynamic to navigate as a founder.
That, and in my case, I think it speaks highly of Matt that, to your point, there wasn't this kind of disinterest or passive kind of engagement. There was zero change in kind of the way he engaged and kind of, in many ways kind of rationalized his position on the board. And he was deeply engaged, deeply valuable, stayed entirely supportive. And I'm very grateful for that. Um, to, that was my first experience. I didn't even know how to kind of navigate that, right? So my relationship again with Kleiner was a lot channeled via Matt, and I think his kind of transition from Kleiner to Menlo was so friendly that even my kind of exposure into the Kleiner kind of ecosystem was well kind of maintained. So the relationships were well maintained. It was an interesting dynamic to navigate, nevertheless.
And as you look back on that experience, was there, we talked earlier about like the things that you are very happy that you did was build deep relationships and credibility within the product organization. Are there other things through that kind of process that you're happy you did, or things that if you were to speak to founders who are navigating a similar situation, you would do differently?
Maybe the one thing I would say is uh, I think have a more opinionated stance on how you get kind of, investment banking support in kind of transactions. Sometimes kind of I think boards can kind of push for that more than
Did you work with an investment banker?
I did. And I would say that I think it depends on the founder, size of transaction, the team that the founder has and the CEO has among themselves, how experienced you are. Obviously, lots of factors. But I felt that for me, it was among my first times. When I did this another time with my next company, yeah, we didn't engage any banker. So it is a completely different life cycle as well with my second company. But I felt that it was something that I think be a more active participant in some of these decisions, even though you have highly experienced board members, etc. At the end of the day, I think your decision has a kind of a disproportionate value. Your perspective has a disproportionate value there because everything is, subtracted from the the headline value of the consideration price. So
Yeah, but it's, you're in these decisions, you're like, well, I've not done this before. Let's hire the person that does this kind of every single day of the week for their career and has done it for decades. Um, but I think sometimes the incentives of investment bankers are not always aligned with the founders in that they are very expert, but there's a danger sometimes that they're repeat customer of the venture investors, not necessarily you as a founder. And so or LinkedIn, or the corporate, the buyer, because they're going to maybe sell other things. And so it's a big generalization. It's not true, but the watch out is that they're probably going to deal with you once, whereas they're likely to deal with the VCs and the corporate many times for their career. And so I
do you
think,
sympathize with kind of my comment that I made?
yeah, 100%. I think it's very natural that you're like, well, I need a professional to help me with this high stakes negotiation transaction but I think you need to reflect that the incentives are not always aligned. And I think it often comes down to just the investors, like the investors who want to see a sort of successful outcome, but have the founders back in this situation.
Indeed, indeed. And I would say that in my case, the kind of the other things that, especially when you're going through this for the first time, and in many founders' cases, maybe that's the only time you would go through.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a high stress moment. Everything has kind of a magnified kind of, and these are big numbers. You've kind of not come across them before, and you have to make decisions on them. It's lots of people's kind of lives and kind of their outcomes at stake. So it feels kind of very high pressure. And many times there is kind of sensitivity to kind of timing of decisioning, etc. I just like when I did this the second time around, I think I breathed much more, and I think as a result of that, I became much more. I would I I. I don't know if I can say much more objective. I think hopefully it also impacted kind of the outcomes in the way in which I was able to kind of drive towards more objective outcomes. I'd feel. I think to your point of advice, I would say that while this feels high duress, high stress, I think it's okay to push back on kind of folks, whether it's the buyer, whether it's the banker, whether it's your board member, all the three Bs, right? Like, kind of just if you need that extra minute,
Yeah.
take it, because it's an outcome that you have to live with, your team has to live with, inside of kind of the buyer. So it impacts you in ways investors kind of cash out, and that's the model, right? That's the business model. So I think that is something that I lived through it in a much more kind of way where I began to appreciate it, and I think I'm better for it today.
When hiring a banker, the expert, if you hire a banker, then you almost push down an M&A process, whether you like it or not,
Yes.
or you're in danger of.
Yes.
And then also the incentives can sometimes change when you start to go through this process where you move from a situation where everyone's aligned to building a great company to an area of kind of self-interest, whether you're the founding team or an executive or the CFO or the venture investor like this. And so I think things change in a surprising way. And I think if you're not cognizant of that, it can be, you can not have the best outcome from the founders.
Maybe one other piece of advice is that as founders, the thing that we are breathing, doing every single moment is focus on the company building, right? Do the right thing, whatever it is. Good things will happen. We just do the right thing. And so as a result of that, at least in my case, I didn't prepare myself for kind of these events as much because I just didn't focus on them. If it had happened, it would happen. I'm focused on the company building.
Yeah.
I would advise that I think founders and today's generation of founders, I think, are better prepared. There's so many more sources of information and kind of ways in which forums of discussion are happening, where I think the founder preparation is much higher today than I felt I was ready for. Just at least having a preview, hearing other founders, their stories, talking to them, at least learning from their experiences is important. It's important to have that. You don't have to spend time thinking about it and planning for it prematurely and completely kind of randomly. But doing that is important so that when it comes to you, you don't feel like you're starting from a cold prize.
So you you joined LinkedIn,
Yes.
and then you joined Microsoft,
Yes.
and then you started a new company,
Yes.
Samooha. And so what was the sort of catalyst behind that? And I think I read elsewhere that you said that starting a found up is a high fixed cost activity. What do you mean by that? And what inspired you to do it all over again?
For me, the reason I say high fixed cost is the kind of the upfront cost of just getting the company off the ground, getting the kind of the early kind of MVP of the product, finding kind of that early product market fit, finding those design customers. And I missed the biggest point, your team that comes together to build this. I mean, the entire magic is the team that comes together to do this. These are all extremely hard problems, right? And there's a huge cost associated with all of this. And I don't know, of late I've started saying this more, like when kind of one of the biggest kind of successful founders of our generation, Jensen Huang, sits on stage and talks about how difficult it is. There's a deep appreciation for that, irrespective of whether it's a 3 trillion company, 3 billion company, or 300 million company.
I think what did he say? He said, like, when asked, would you do this again? He goes, absolutely not. And yet he's been, he's changed and dominated the entire industry, and he
Correct.
wouldn't do it again.
So to that point that you just said, I just wanted to say that that's true no matter whether it's 3 trillion, 300 billion, or 3 billion. That's what I mean by irrespective of kind of the 3 trillion or order of magnitude, the fixed cost from a founder perspective for kind of to hit that escape velocity is very high. And so there are, that was kind of my way of recognizing that, and also probably kind of giving a sense to founders that your best bet is to take a shot at yourself and invest in yourself, but do it with eyes opened, that there is a big cost associated kind of to walk down the founder journey, especially to a successful founder journey, or the other way. It's a big cost to walk down. So that was kind of my notion of kind of the fixed cost, if you may.
But for you, so with, in any sort of, you're quite a rational person. I'm sure there's a cost, but there's also an opportunity associated with that. And so you must have seen a massive opportunity to kind of to go through that cost again, because it's like, you're a mother, you're gone through that journey. It's like, what was the opportunity that you saw?
So irrespective of the cost, the reward is incredible. It's not just simply kind of the reward. I think spans the multiple dimensions of kind of the value that you create in terms of the product that you build for the world around you, and kind of the sheer high. There's nothing to beat that high, right? There's no amount of money that matches the high of creating value out of a product that you've built. And again, that is a whole kind of spectrum in on itself, depending on the kind of product that you do. So for me, that reward is disproportionately high. With the recognition that the cost is substantial, that reward is high. Of course, there are kind of other more kind of worldly rewards, if you may, of like, financial outcomes, otherwise, etc. That happens. It comes along the way. And for different founders, different individuals, for me, those are immaterial. I'm somewhat addicted to the high of creating value. And I love that kind of 0 to 1 journey. I think it probably goes back to my kind of roots, my PhD roots. It's kind of this building from ground up, this first principles. There's nothing on paper. So I remember Matt Murphy at Kleiner Perkins when I started Drawbridge. I literally just walked in with a laptop on the first day, like post funding. He's like, that's it. I was like, yep, that's it. We're going to start from here. So I don't shy away from that. And I find that to be one of the most rewarding parts. I don't know if you agree with that and kind of your experience. The early days are kind of the most thrilling days. At some point, post kind of certain scale, the unrewarding parts of the founder journey are kind of just the general managerial kind of aspects, administrative aspects of running, but kind of the innovation aspects are highly concentrated in kind of the early days.
Yeah, I think that, I look at it like balancing constituents in some ways. Like at the very beginning, very, very beginning, it's just you and the founders, and you are kind of, you have an opportunity to, your only constituent is yourself. And so you're in a position to optimize for things that you are uniquely capable to do, and you in an environment that you uniquely love. Like this is the people you want to be, the culture you create, the team that you love. And then you bring in investors, and you bring in investors that hopefully you love to work with and inspire you every day. And then that, it's generally, additive. And then but the more constituents you bring on, you bring customers, you bring partners, you bring more employees. It's like there's more complexity, and you can't actually delight all those constituents consistently all the time. But it's that early phase where you have you know, a small number of constituents that you can delight them. It's such a thrilling part of the journey.
You said something that's like really struck me, that you can't delight all of them at the same time equally, etc. Is that one of your realizations that you developed as a founder, CEO yourself? That look, I'm not going to be able to satisfy all my constituencies by an equal amount. Certainly not at the same time. Certainly not all of them. And was that liberating for you once you realized that?
Yeah, I know. I think so. I ended up like, because you end up in any, particularly in marketplace businesses, but also ecosystem, but you end up, what I ended up doing was stack ranking my constituents. What is number one in some certain organizations? Your customers need to be number one. In certain organizations, your employees need to be number one. Um, And then actually, if you have, it's a very rational way to do it, but otherwise you're in this decision paralysis because you can't decide, well, do I delight consumers or delight employers? And and making that kind of like really forced decision to kind of, this is the stat rank. And of course, it's not black and white, but as a framework, it helps to choose between, okay, are we going to make a decision to, it could be we're going to do things at the obsession of our customer delight, and we're going to um, deteriorate our financial performance, which may make short-term investors disappointed. So be it. That's fine. But I think if you're not conscious of those trade-offs, then you're going to fall into a trap, and it's going to be problematic for you
This
as
is
a
one of the
person.
nuggets I hope the listeners of the podcast get. This is an important nugget, this kind of framework. Otherwise, to your point, I think decisioning is one of the cardinal things that we as founders do, especially in kind of in the presence of insufficient, incomplete information. And we are not taught. We are not kind of professional decision makers. I don't know who is, but we are certainly not kind of bred to do that. And then we're thrown into an environment where that's something that we have to do routinely, right? So the framework that you laid out is kind of one of the very important ones, that you should have some framework. Otherwise, you're going to be like decision paralysis and emotional duress.
And it's also, I think it's very helpful to have that transparency with your board and your employees as well. This is our priority. This is what we're going to do. And, absent of that, you're going to get knocked around by different participants to make those decisions.
Absolutely. So anyway, coming to I joined Microsoft. I spent time with Satya and Kevin Scott. Kevin Scott has this group called Office of the CTO. It was called Octo. So it was where all kind of a lot of the strategic projects, including OpenAI at the time, etc. excuse me, came out of. So it was really amazing times. I mean, the biggest learning that I had before I talk about kind of my next company is seeing Satya in action. I mean, it's a delight. It's a delight to be in his meetings, and you see what a CEO of at scale kind of operates as. And it was amazing to see a leader of his kind not insist on the mic time in a meeting. And so that was kind of one of my biggest learnings I had. So anyway, that was a great experience. And when I joined Kevin back again after almost over a decade, because Kevin at AdMob. And then when I joined his team, it kind of felt that it was kind of this super SWAT team of specialists. They're called technical advisors, who basically work on like super special projects at Microsoft. And I think I may have had a conversation with Kevin where there was a sense that I'm kind of this person who probably will jump into my next entrepreneurial pursuit. But this is, again, going back to kind of Kevin's kind of USP, right? Again, going back to kind of the AdMob USP and the leadership, the ability to let be, and the ability to know that, I'll take whatever time I can with smart people because they're bound to go ahead and do other things. I think that kind of acceptance is also hugely kind of valuable in creating, fostering talent, and not having to kind of hold on to them because sometimes it's human tendency to want to hold on to people. I certainly kind of went through that. I think I learned that as well from Kevin. And so then when I was thinking about this idea about I think this maybe resonates more with you, Pete, is that this whole notion of, escrow and kind of the world that kind of the product, that legendary product you've built, and kind of and kind of we all have gone through an escrow transaction at one point or in real estate at one point or another in our lives. That notion around data doesn't exist because data has kind of this highly kind of sensitive nature to it, especially enterprise data has some sovereign value to it. It has competitive value to it. And yet businesses have to transact with data with each other. It's not just a consumer and an enterprise, it's business and business as well. And again, a world that you, of course, have gone through in kind of the products that you have built yourself as well. So to think about like products, data clouds that provide that kind of secure, governed collaboration environment where enterprises can share data without making copies of the data across kind of, cloud replication environments, etc. I think that notionality is extremely critical across all industry use cases, but certainly in the media marketing industry, with again going back to kind of the evolution of regulation, et cetera, circa post AdMob, post Drawbridge. That kind of got me to this, like, will there be kind of a world where Slack or Dropbox, etc., like cloud storage, collaboration environments will evolve to kind of data collaboration while keeping the security governance of the underlying data? And you can actually do good things out of data rather than simply generate user-generated communication content. And that was kind of the heart of this company, Samooha, that I founded. And while it has, and I'll be the first person to say this, it has a very reductionist way of thinking about it as a clean room, because it comes as kind of clean room from kind of the, be it kind of the fab clean rooms you think about, or even kind of the data clean rooms when you think about transactions, the finance corp dev environments. That's kind of behind what the positioning of it as a clean room. But my thinking of it is, could we create kind of these intelligent environments where will there be a generation of data collaboration where you're not simply talking and collaborating with your colleagues and people within your enterprise or across enterprises. You'll actually conduct under the parameters of governance, security policies that you set up in your data. So will there be a world where we, as an enterprise employee, not only do we get our badge, our laptop, and all the kind of associated enterprise devices, we'll get policy data depending on the function, the role, etc., that we are in a given enterprise, and we will become, citizens of data, stewards of data within the enterprise. We become empowered to do that. That requires data collaboration to be done right within an enterprise and across enterprises.
So just so I understand it. So the all enterprise data and consumer data is now in the cloud, and then the opportunity is enabling data to be or companies to analyze and understand data that sits in multiple clouds, in multiple companies, in multiple environments, and to make decisions, analysis, recommendations from that data without sharing that data, without combining that data, but to do it in a way which is maintaining security, maintaining primacy of that data, but to enabling that in this safe environment is a massive unlock, particularly in the world of AI today, where you see the opportunity is really fueled by data.
Exactly. And I think, to your point, it's a massive opportunity, and exactly to the point that you said, irrespective of kind of the cloud environment that you're in. So when you think about that, at least when I was thinking about the idea, and then that's where kind of, for me, I don't know, there was a company that came to my mind when I was thinking about this idea. It's when I thought about the cloud agnosticity, it was Snowflake. It's like, it is because they have the cloud agnosticity. It's a highly governance is a big part of what Snowflake offers. But kind of this building this kind of collaboration capability for enterprises is a great unlock. And kind of that's where I felt like, as an independent startup, we can start building, maybe for certain industry use cases. That's why clean rooms and media marketing, et cetera. But when you think about this in, I don't know, healthcare, and how healthcare data can be between providers, pharma, payers, there's hugely regulated compliance requirements around all these data, and how data can be more empowering, enabling. And similarly, if you think about, I don't know, when you think about kind of the way in which I think even government is moving, these interdepartmental agencies on data sharing, how do you kind of create this kind of environment for agencies to share data with each other without having to, again, create copies of the data?
Yeah.
Migration and replication of data is at the heart of, crumbles of data that you leave at the heart of primacy, and to your point, sovereignty of data and the breakage of that. So that was kind of the idea and the product value prop under which I wanted to start the company. I even thought about it should be, can I do this at Microsoft? But again, kind of there is this kind of the reason we live in the area that we live in is because there are people who want to move at a certain pace, and that's something that has kind of been kind of constant for me. So I felt the only way I could do it was kind of start a company and kind of, move with purpose and intent. And I got together with my co-founder, and we both started this company.
And your
And
co-founder's background is?
is in encryption and cryptography from Apple. And so he and I got to meet each other. His name is Abhishek Bhamik. I got to meet him through a friend of mine. And kind of we really get a meeting of the minds
Yeah.
very early on.
It's a deeply technical problem to solve.
It's a deeply technical problem to solve. And so in some ways, it's technical in a kind of a different dimension when you think about cryptographic techniques, secure multi-party computation, when you think about cloud-based technologies, you think about that dimension versus kind of machine learning on graphs, if you may. But again, the undercurrent is kind of algorithm development at the heart of kind of both of it. So that's where some of kind of, my common value exists. And my personal development is that I think I'm not purely a technologist or I don't know, not even an algorithm kind of person. I think I started understanding the value of product market fit. What does it mean to have kind of sales and business development and partnerships and raising capital and being able to communicate kind of customer value, deeply care about customer value. And all of those things makes me a better, kind of more rounded founder versus being kind of the technical founder.
Yeah, the marketing industries are highly commercial by design, and so they have a very they have a clear economic imperative, and the product will live or die by its efficacy in the market rather than sort of a core engineering
100%.
product. And so
100%.
you by nature in those industries, they're tough. They're tough industries. You can win and lose in the same year, just because things can change so quickly.
I'm
But
so
it
glad you said
creates
that.
it creates a very commercial.
I'm so glad you said that, because in one of my conversations at Snowflake, I was saying that, look, I mean, one of the industries that I think the world at large has kind of a love-hate relationship with advertising and marketing for all the right reasons, right? I mean, what it symbolizes or kind of means. But I would also say that it's one of the most elastic industries where kind of if you have a product that works exactly to the point, it'll hit faster. The industry will absorb it faster than other industries. But by the same token, if it doesn't, it'll be dropped the very same day as well. So I think very well said in what you did. So that was kind of the product that I got together with my co-founder. This is an industry which has some of these problems that present itself when you think about kind of how the big platforms, et cetera, are stepping away from kind of trackability, and that's a constantly evolving topic. And even most recently, Google, with all the antitrust, there are positions that Google has reversed itself, etc. So it's a very dynamic environment, and this kind of handling customer data, consumer data, and doing that in a compliant, privacy-safe fashion is an extremely important problem. It's as important in healthcare. The problem is healthcare moves so much slower than this industry does. So that's why you're able to make moves in this industry faster. So we got started. We got some really early kind of wins, like big names like T-Mobile, et cetera, that we kind of got to win. And then it was interesting.
And then you raised initial capital from
Altimeter. And I met Brad Gerstner I sit on the board of a company called iHeartMedia. And so Brad is my fellow board member there. And
he was a board member at Zillow early on.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was like he's a way back a travel guy.
That's true. That's true.
An online travel guy, and then obviously now a generalist in investor with a. But yeah, he was on the board of Zillow before the merger between the companies. But no, I've known
He stayed on after the merger?
No, he left before, but he was always like very engaging, and we've stayed in touch. So like he's a terrific and very sharp guy.
Very sharp. I sometimes say his superpower is his ability to listen and kind of synthesize information. And anyway, so I met Brad, and then he has been very active with Snowflake. And once I just called him, and he thought it was going to be an iHeart call or something, and I was like, hey, I've been kind of working on this and wanted to see. I think they're in a intersect with Snowflake is very strong here because this has a cloud agnosticity, and this kind of, we should partner with Snowflake here on this one. He's like, this makes a ton of sense. And one thing led to another. I had funded the company, got started, then he put in an early check and an Altimeter, and Snowflake, and I got connected with my current boss, who's Christian Kleineman. He's the EVP of product at Snowflake, an amazing guy, by the way. So he saw some of kind of what we had put in, we had developed as an MVP product. Things were extremely synergistic with Snowflake. And we had very quick early customer wins as well. And within a year, Snowflake put a pretty compelling offer to buy the company. This was about 11 months or so since the company was.
Did I read right that you took money from Snowflake Ventures?
Yes. So
And that was with Altimeter at the
with
very beginning?
Altimeter.
Because that's probably an interesting decision, because you're like, you know that Snowflake is a phenomenal platform to build this application on top of, to give you distribution and access to their ecosystem and customers. But taking the money is also taking the money from Snowflake Ventures may create a lack of alignment or kind of or potential conflicts
100%.
of interest. How did you think about that?
100%. I think great question, Pete. So interesting story around that as well. So I've been kind of a fangirl of Snowflake's kind of, enterprise success from its kind of early days. So there is a moment during all of this kind of machinations. I was on a customer call. I got a call from a 408 number, and I didn't answer. I didn't recognize the number. And then the text popped up saying, "Hi, Kamakshi, this is Mike Scarpelli, CFO of Snowflake." And I had like a total fangirl moment. He was like, "Can you call me back?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll call you back."
And this is when you were just conceiving of the idea?
No, this was when the machinations of, exactly to your question of like, does it make sense
Oh,
for
so
Snowflake
you were in
Ventures?
discussions with
Yes.
Snowflake Ventures, and then
Yes, so I
the
got
CFO comes in.
yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, I think it's a great point, and I did grapple with it a fair bit. I had kind of a personal kind of mantra after Drawbridge to say that I never do corporate kind of investor ever. It comes with a lot of strings attached, and it's, I don't know, usually painful. I don't want to be too kind of blanket statement about it, but this was kind of my personal experience. And I kind of violated it with Snowflake Ventures, if you may. And I think, exactly to your point, it had kind of a lot of kind of considerations for me. And at the time of company inception, formation, this could be many things across even competing kind of companies, et cetera. It doesn't have to be, and to your point, we could distribute this across the hyperscaling kind of CSPs, the cloud service providers themselves as well. So there were so many directions in which we could go. So Snowflake Ventures, does it come with too many strings attached? So I would say that Snowflake, and especially a lot of kudos to Christian himself and the Snowflake team, they did a great job of like, it depends on each founder and kind of their personal kind of, line that they would like to tread. But they set a line that was fairly independent to say that, look, go ahead and like, obviously there were kind of asks initially to see if we could do a like, more like Snowflake leaning, but we had a desire to kind of explore the full spectrum of possibilities. And the Snowflake Ventures check, I was quite specific that should not keep us bound to kind of, one environment, platform, or another. And I give a lot of kudos to Snowflake Ventures that it was not heavy-handed in the sense that it comes with an exclusivity and that you cannot work with someone else.
Yeah, I've seen it many different ways, but I've certainly seen some excellent corporate VCs that, and in theory, they could be some of the single best investors, because they understand your market, they are aligned with the outcome in terms of success, in terms of they want to help you succeed, they can help you succeed, and they're going to be rewarded for it. And so I've seen some scenarios where it's been incredibly beneficial. I think Shopify Ventures have done a good job recently. They're not trying to, that many companies worry about platform risk. And in some ways, like having Snowflake as an investor kind of mitigates that platform risk as long as they're cognizant they're not trying to pollute that platform. I've also seen the opposite where they kind of like use investments for kind of rights of first refusals, for information, for corporate um, learning and development, and so. But it sounds like this was a great
Yeah.
relationship.
So I mean, exactly to the point, Pete, you said that to my earlier comment of corporate VCs, my personal experience wasn't very pleasant earlier on. So that's why kind of I swore off of it. To your point, there are many corporate VCs who are excellent, great investors in their own right. Depending on the corporate, and exactly to your point, this could be a match made in heaven. I think I ended up in that kind of fortunate point on the Snowflake side. Um, as probably a special case because there are many other kind of situations where it's probably gone wrong as well. But in this case, I would say that I ended up as a special case. It's an example of how it went right. We had the opportunity where we didn't have the shackles around us to kind of bind us to one or the other. Um, Honestly, the kind of early customer wins that we got. How does T-Mobile, work with like an 11-month, less than 11-month-old startup, like big names, Comcast, T-Mobile? These were all the kind of things that I would say the go-to-market vehicle that Snowflake can expose you to, or Snowflake, not vehicle, but kind of the go-to-market ecosystem that can be opened up if you are a good product for kind of the fit around Snowflake and its customer base is tremendous. And that's kind of, I would say, in our case, between the ventures and Snowflake's kind of, value prop itself of opening up an ecosystem that if you are able to, again, create the right alliances with their sales team, et cetera, it becomes like a real vehicle. Snowflake sales team does a great job of kind of, partner sales, like, how they bring kind of, effective partners into customer conversations. I think, especially in kind of today's kind of post AI world, where we are talking about like lower cost of sales, I think alignment with the likes of Snowflake, et cetera, can be really interesting considerations for founders. Where is there a way in which you are able to, again, depending on the product, depending on the category and the industry, I don't want to make blanket statements. I think leveraging those kind of dynamics with companies such as Snowflake can kind of accelerate the time for initial go-to-market. I'm not saying that it's a replacement for scaled go-to-market motion, but for initial go-to-market, by compressing that and realizing kind of initial kind of success, I think companies like Snowflake can be extremely valuable there. And certainly Samooha was kind of one such kind of player and product.
And then so Snowflake acquired Samooha, would say 11 months after the initial financing.
Technically, I think the acquisition closed slightly after the 12th month after the year.
But and so what was I mean, was it the fact that you could see this 1 + 1 = 4? It kind of, you can obviously you're building in part on their platform, and then you kind of can leverage their go to market and customer relationships. Was it as simple as that? Okay, we got to this team, we really like this team. They can accelerate our vision 5-10x. Was that?
That's basically it. They can accelerate our vision 5-10x. And then there's see there's also another kind of product reality or a go-to-market reality I was contending with. Again, going back to kind of I'm a more rounded founder today versus just being a technical founder, right? While the product of collaboration is an extremely critical one, I was quite aware that I'm looking at kind of a polynomial scale of complexity of sales. I'm not selling to one customer at a time. I'm selling to multiple customers at a time. And
Because you need to kind of it's data
it's a
collaboration.
collaboration.
Yeah.
Selling to one customer is hard enough. Selling to multiple is supremely harder. So it was a dynamic that I was quite aware of. So I could have said, there was a time when in the kind of company inception, I was like, look, it's an interesting problem. It is going to be solved maybe by the hyperscalers themselves or maybe by an independent company. it can be prohibitively complex from a go-to-market perspective, because of which maybe I should step back from this. Like I won't be able to there's not enough kind of dollars, venture dollars available to fund building kind of a team of this size to be, and at the time span to be able to bring all these kind of the time to sales for all of these participants to customers to come together. But I still went forward with it. And for me, the kind of ecosystem dynamics the likes of Snowflake played was a big part of being able to get that lift off. So for me, this 1+1 greater than 2, I lived it even in those 11 months, and I felt like it is extremely critical for the success of this product. So, and having kind of seen the patterns of it and how, like, at least kind of the sponsor, Christian in this case, was supremely supportive. The sales team was great in terms of the interactions that we had across product sales, partnerships. It was kind of a great combination. Mike Scarpelli is a compelling negotiator, is compelling personality himself. A lot of things came together. I felt like, okay, this is a moment in time, supremely premature, to be honest with you.
So one path is raise an enormous amount of money, essentially, to kind of to actually go through this multiple sales process, complicated build out, um, with significant potential, but like a ton of execution risk and financial risk against that. And the other path is to sort of build that within Snowflake itself, and that.
And Snowflake constructed it very well too. And I give Snowflake a lot of kudos in the fact that, I mean, they were recognizing of the fact that, look, this could be a big independent company for ourselves, and like we don't have to do this. So, I mean, without going into the specifics of it, Snowflake, even as a part of like construct of the transaction itself, Snowflake is very creative in terms of doing this the right way. And I think over the years, they've gotten very creative, very compelling, very aggressive in terms of identifying targets and making it kind of very compelling for whether it's the founder, the product, etc. So I think a combination of these factors were all very kind of interesting. Interesting. There's the earlier version of this. I don't know, Pete, if you know, Cisco had championed this alpha model of kind of the spin-ins, like these
The
capped out,
spin-outs?
the spin-outs, and then
Yeah.
there's this kind of the
Bring them back
spin-ins,
in. Yep.
spring them back in. I don't know if that ever happened at scale. There were certainly some kind of noteworthy successes there, right? I think that this is not quite that, but I think, and I don't know, the real version of that is called venture. That's what you do. There is no other outcome for it. But I think Snowflake, at least maybe in one or two instances, has done it kind of successfully. I don't know if this is necessarily qualifies as that, but maybe this has flavors of it, if I may.
Yeah, I mean, it's recognizing that to build transformative technology, it can be really hard to do that internally. And so bringing in, other startups, perhaps prematurely, and scale them within that environment is the more likely path to success. And it may appear on paper very expensive for the sort of incumbent team, but the opportunity cost is enormous because the world is moving so fast.
Exactly. And I think it also depends on the executive sponsorship, etc. Exactly to your point of the incumbent team. On paper, maybe expensive. Their conviction, their belief, how they're able to kind of rally an organization, a team behind it. So I think there is some kind of the right person, right time, right company, right product, right founder team. All of these have to come together. I think Samooha had that kind of as a moment in time kind of thing. Someone asked me, so Drawbridge was, AdMob was 4 years, Drawbridge was almost 8 years, and then Samooha was like less than a year. So all I said is you live and you learn. I don't know. They were like, oh, what happened? So, but again, it's my takeaway is that I think my journey has evolved through this, and I think I'm a fuller person who's able to identify things and opportunities and fits better. Again, going back to this question that you asked about kind of what is the advice you would have for a founder. See, that corporate development done with product teams. I did that relentlessly from kind of my second half of Drawbridge into Samooha. Like at Samooha, my kind of my connections into AWS or Snowflake or a bunch of other big kind of hyperscalers was very deep from pretty early on. So we were working with a lot of these guys from pretty much inception, because I think that product partnership is something that has played out well for me for the class of products, and especially enterprise deep tech data machine learning. I'm not yet AI products. That interface is extremely critical because the big kind of incumbents they have strategies in this direction. They have not fully built out kind of products, so they are paying attention to it. They have some leverage in one way, shape, or form, either in terms of an opportunity like LinkedIn Marketing Solutions, in Snowflake's case, kind of collaboration products themselves. To your point, the opportunity cost is high for them because they have existing momentum. So I think some of identifying these things, finding the right partners, interfacing with them, getting started early on is invaluable.
Yeah, incredible opportunity. Well, I just have one last question for you, and it's been amazing hearing your story. So you've spent the last 15 years in the heart of data in Silicon Valley, building and in startups and corporates, and here we are in just an incredibly dynamic, exciting environment where data is fueling a lot of the AI innovation. And so, I'm curious if you were to give advice both to early stage founders who are looking at this space today, and then also for corporates and enterprises thinking about this. What advice would you give to those two constituents, knowing what you know today?
To founders, I hope what I'm about to say sounds appropriately measured and not like too dreamy. Um, if you have a chance to give a shot to anything, give it to yourself. You are your best investment. And I think there is so I say this, when I say this to founders, I know it sounds oxymoronic. Haven't they done that already? That's why they're founders. But I'm saying this to kind of, good engineers, good product managers, good salespeople, like good kind of, employees themselves who just are basically contemplating ideas, but are not risk forward. Then for some reason, the risk forward kind of weighs in on them. It's a tough one because it seems infinite. So I would say that I think you should give yourself that chance. And as I said, that's why I hope I'm not too dreamy.
To invest in yourself.
Invest
to
in
take
yourself.
a risk.
To take a risk and invest in yourself. It's literally the best bet any human being can do for themselves. It's the most amount of justice we can do to ourselves, is invest in ourselves. And it does involve a moment in time when the risk seems infinite and the reward seems unknown, in fact, zero or negative at best or at worst. But I still believe that it is worth the risk that one should take for oneself. And the earlier you do it, the more chances you have for kind of, course correction and recalibration and repivoting and pivoting yourself in the right direction. And when data startups, especially for founders, it's a tough one. Unlike founder journey, products is tough across the board. For machine learning, AI, and data infrastructure and data startups, there's this chicken and egg problem. At Drawbridge, at Samooha, there was one common. Where is the data? I'm just getting started. I have no data to access. So this is where understanding how do I identify some design customers, kind of, big, large corporate incumbents completely out of the realm. You have to find the right size of big enough to be interested, but not too big, not too small where they themselves are kind of figuring this out. So I think finding that as kind of the early insertion points. This is all art that is as much necessary as the science of being able to solve for this, right? I think data startups come up against that. AI also comes up against this. Where is access to data? So I don't know. Take a shot at yourself and understand how to calibrate data acquisition. It's extremely critical. And maybe for kind of, and I have kind of this, even in the world of, I have to give a shout out here, given that I'm a female founder. I have this thing of WTFF, where's the female founder? I want more female founders to kind of to take a shot at yourself and risk forward. tends to have some correlation with gender. There are other factors as well. So I don't know, maybe that's kind of my call out there. And to corporates and incumbents, I'd say that I think having the product teams empowered, like I really like the Snowflake model in which Christian has kind of an interesting philosophy where like it's huge amount of autonomy, huge amount of empowerment. Product leads work actively with market, like, and with startups to be able to identify kind of new innovative ideas, companies, teams, engage with them deeply, understand how to bring them into kind of the platform, become early adoptees. This is not generally true across every type of tech product, but I think having this kind of culture, kind of making kind of founder friendly, deep, high amount of empowerment for product leads within incumbents kind of creates a good dynamic where people become resourceful in identifying kind of pockets of talent and opportunity that can create acceleration paths for the incumbents that is not very top heavy. Like, oh, the CEO is like, I'm sure there were times when there are certain companies that you got exposed to, you identified, etc. But there are probably equal other opportunities for acceleration at your time at Trulia, Zillow, etc., where others were able to, in your team, were able to identify and bring that to you.
I think particularly now when the rate of change is accelerating so quickly, the access to information, if you're a CEO, is at a big company, is just like you just don't get
It's a
the
sliver.
signal. It's you get a, and then the kind of the rate of change is so fast. So you need someone who is like inside the organization, able to access the information, understands the business needs, and are able to act on that very quickly.
And that then product creates the right interface, whether it's with kind of venture as a vehicle of investment or whether it is corp dev as a vehicle of acquisition to accelerate kind of your innovation. I think that product function, I think, is an important one to be able to do that. So at least kind of the companies that I have either been acquired by or worked with, I think this function is an important one. So I hope that incumbents are more forward to your point of this level of rate of change that we are living in, so that like the leadership's null space doesn't become the company's null space.
Thank you so much for joining us
Thank
today.
you very much. It was great to have this conversation with you.